In his roles as former head of Bank of America's Cybersecurity and Identity Management and former official with the Department of Homeland Security, Greg Garcia has long championed collaboration and data sharing to fuel our industry's efforts to defeat fraudsters and financial criminals. Today, he will discuss the importance of pooling our resources to achieve our common goals. Please welcome Greg Garcia.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I got to say I'm very humbled and a little bit nervous to be following General Cartwright on the podium, but I do have the honor and the privilege of having been able to call him a partner, a collaborative partner, back in my Homeland Security days. He was a gracious host to me at Stratcom in Omaha, Nebraska, where we spent about an hour discussing our common cybersecurity challenges. So I just wanted to say, General Cartwright, that was an inspiring discussion, and I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for your leadership, for your service to this nation, and we very much appreciate it. Let's give him a hand. I also want to take a moment and recognize the organizers of this conference at early warning, Paul Finch and Marianne Keegan and Tiffany Frazing, the whole team. I've been made to feel very welcome here. This is obviously a very professional event with an extraordinary turnout of committed professionals dedicated to collaboration and anti-fraud and everything we need to do collectively to beat the adversaries. So thanks to the early warning team. This is a great event. So I'm here to speak about collaboration, protecting the financial community through collaboration, and maybe just take a couple of minutes to give you a little bit more of my background, to give you a sense of the context, just why I'm here, what am I talking about. The VOG did say that I was formerly with Bank of America as their partnership executive, which essentially meant that as a very large bank with a large footprint, the recognition was that the community at large, the risk in the community at large, whether it's consumer customers or commercial large customers, that is risk borne by Bank of America, by the banking system, by the financial community. So we're sort of all in this together, and it's incumbent upon major financial institutions to do what they can externally in the community to raise the bar, to raise the level of security across the ecosystem. So that was very much a mission of collaboration and partnership. And before that, yes, I was the country's first Assistant Secretary for Cybersecurity and Communications under the Department of Homeland Security, President Bush. I had under me the National Cybersecurity Division, which is to protect our national cyber infrastructure. I had the National Communications System, which was to ensure that the President, that the nation, the government had communications in times of national emergency. And finally, the Office of Emergency Communications, which was a new entity created by the Congress to ensure that there was a national strategy of interoperable communications across different jurisdictions. This was born out of the Hurricane Katrina, where one parish in New Orleans could not speak to the other parish in New Orleans on emergency communications wavelengths. So in order for one to succeed in the Department of Homeland Security, a euphemistic word is it's a very competitive environment in the Department of Homeland Security, very challenging, and so you really cannot succeed without collaboration, because there are so many different overlaps across the organization and across the government in the interagency community, that unless you're working with people, with your counterparts within and externally within the government, you're probably working at cross purposes, which is a recipe for self-destruction. Prior to that, I had a variety of roles in the U.S. Congress, drafting legislation, which became law, working as a public policy lobbyist for the information technology sector with a company called 3Com Corporation, the Information Technology Association, the American Electronics Association. All of these things had some form of collaboration, some form of partnership. There is strength in numbers. You can't do it alone. You need to develop political alliances, substantive alliances of subject matter experts across the spectrum who have a stake in the outcome. And sometimes the stake is different from yours. Sometimes it's competitive, and having to find those areas of compromise, those areas of common ground, is really sort of the art and the science that I've been dealing with throughout my career. So I come at this with some experience and some passion. Just by way of example, in the early 90s, one of the big collaborative events, lobbying campaigns, was to remove the excessive controls on the export of high-performance computers. Computers that were considered to be useful for the proliferation of nuclear weapons, designing, testing nuclear weapons. It was an alliance of the computer companies, of the semiconductor companies, of the telecommunications companies, partners in the Congress. Very successful. We succeeded in doing that on the merits of the arguments as well as the political capital that we brought to bear. Same in the middle 90s. We worked with the government, consumer electronics, information technology, and others to negotiate a global agreement on free trade in information technology products. Lower the tariffs, bring them down, lower the cost to American consumers. In the late 90s, we partnered a very interesting and unholy alliance of civil liberties, very conservative people, anti-tax, high-tech, privacy advocates, to work with the government and against the government to overturn very onerous restrictions on the export of encryption technology, software encryption, which, of course, if it's exported abroad, it makes it difficult to do foreign surveillance by the National Security Agency. But we successfully argued that this horse has left the barn. The technology is ubiquitous. We need to find other ways. Many other examples, but all of these, I think the defining and common thread throughout all of them is that they were all for a broader good. Everything that I was working toward had a bigger and broader impact than just my organization at the time. It had a societal purpose. It was operating on the edict that you do well by doing good. And I think that's sort of a foundational element of what good collaboration and partnership means. You do well by doing good because you're doing something that's bigger than you. It's a much larger community effort. And it sort of reminds you of perhaps a theme for this conference, is that there were two men moving down the street to the planter boxes on the sidewalk. The first man would dig the hole, and the second man would fill the hole up. And they kept doing this planter box after planter box, and a woman saw them. What on earth is going on? And they said, "Ma'am, the guy who is supposed to plant the trees didn't show up for work today." So what I want for us to be doing at the end of this conference is to be able to be planting trees, because the trees are really the branches of information sharing, the branches of the relationships, the roots that go down. It's probably kind of a gauzy metaphor, but you get the idea that if you dig in the hole and you prepare the ground, but there isn't somebody there, if there isn't a team there to actually put the roots down for the kind of collaboration you need, it isn't going to happen. So today I just want to talk a little bit about some of the examples of partnership and collaboration as they've applied to the financial sector and to other sectors. Give examples of some that didn't work and some that did. I should have is this the, okay, it's like getting into a new rental car, you got to get oriented. Where are the controls? Where's the mirror? What am I doing up here? So anyway, I'll talk a little bit about what has worked, what has not worked, and maybe a call to action at the end. I was joking with Paul last night that we have one thing in common. You don't know what I'm about to say, and neither do I. At least not exactly. So where do we get this unit to actually change the Any assistance? There we go. So that's actually why I like to use PowerPoint. If I don't have much to say, I need someone well-versed in the art of torture. Do you know PowerPoint? So I have just about 30 minutes or so, and I'll try to stick to the golden rule. Make sure that I finish speaking before you finish listening. All right, so why are we here? This is our motivation. It's fighting fraud and theft. If those of you might not read it, you know you can do this just as easily online. I can only imagine by now how many statistics you all have heard at this conference characterizing the challenges that we're facing in fraud and in cybersecurity. But I just want to give you a couple more that I just happened to read on the plane over. A very interesting company called TrustWave produced a 2012 global security report, which I would recommend for your reading. Just a few findings that they had was that customer records. So they did a survey of all of their customers, several hundred customers, incident response, investigations, forensics that they went into, penetration tests, a number of things. Customer records remained the most valuable target in all of the breaches that they investigated. 89% of the breaches, the breached data that they investigated, involved customer records. In 76% of their incident response investigations, a third party that was responsible for system support, development, or maintenance introduced that security problem or vulnerability. And finally, interestingly, e-commerce and payment card attacks saw the biggest growth in the Asia Pacific and Europe and Middle East areas. So I found that interesting. All right. So, when faced with these challenges, this is, the eye chart that a lot of you actually have to look at. It's the operational challenge you face in managing your infrastructure and the operations of your security and your anti-fraud capabilities. And there are many variations on this. You've got to deal with risk assessments and confidentiality and compliance, a whole range of things. A lot of variations on the schematic, but what's common is it's always complex. Right? You all know that. You are protecting trillions of dollars in assets, in transactions, personal identities, business plans, operational stability. That can be very lonely, can't it? Until your systems are infected or corrupted or data is stolen. Then you got lots of company, don't you? You've got the C-suite in the company coming down on you. You're no longer lonely. You got lots of company because you've got malware infecting your systems, and you're feeling and reeling a little bit like this fellow. Okay, how many of you actually have felt like Homer Simpson at one point or another? Raise your hands. Come on, be honest. Yeah, we all have that moment, and sometimes it's quite alarming, and but we're not alone. So this is, in my view, one diagram that depicts some of the intersection of some aspects of our online lives. A colleague looked at that and said, where's the pornography bubble? One can argue it's in all of them. But really, the middle area should read cyberspace collaboration because it really represents the touch points of where we cannot do business without others. So in everything we do in business and education and social, it starts to bleed into privacy and civil liberties, or we're going after government services. We may be doing something illegal. We have to find the bounds of law enforcement for our activities online that won't get us in trouble. So this is really where I think you all need to be directing some of your attention when we think about what are the communities of collaboration that we need to establish and cultivate where each of these communities of interest depend upon and assist you in your mission. And in some cases, if you're not coordinated across these communities of interest, you could be working at cross purposes, or you could be missing some valuable information that's going to protect your customers, protect your systems from some form of fraud or attack. But I over the last several years have found that too many organizations, maybe some of yours, don't support this imperative or are using and committing resources to other priorities. And it's understandable. But, it shouldn't be that hard. It reminds me of a small story. A teacher was teaching a very small student about how to use the zipper, how to use your zipper on your jacket. And she said, the secret to the zipper is simple. Just the one half has to connect to the other half before you start zipping it up. And the little girl looked up at the teacher very quizzically and asked, but why does it have to be a secret? And, that is, I think that has always been one of the hang-ups in collaboration. Secrecy might be our biggest problem. We have many reasons why we should not, and some legitimate reasons why we have to be careful about the kinds of sensitive information that we're sharing with others. Liability, and liability that goes with contractual restrictions. If you think about large ISPs that may be violating customer records by sharing them with other customers that may be in forensics or any kind of cybersecurity activity. Competitive concerns. I think in the financial sector may very well be an exception to the rule where there's an understanding that bank number one could get hit tomorrow and bank number two will get hit today. And we're all in this together, and it makes no sense and it's no use to use one bank's misfortune in an advertisement that says we're more secure than the next bank. Because as soon as you say that, you're next. So there's no competitive concerns there. And that really is what has driven, I think, what is a pretty strong culture of collaboration and information sharing across the financial services sector. But vulnerability exposure. No doubt, as with Bank of America, many of your organizations were always watchful about the extent to which any kind of information that we share that has some exposure of vulnerability could be used against us by adversaries. So you have to constantly balance the imperative for sharing information to get smarter and the protection of that information to be secure. And finally, of course, reputational damage. Okay, so why? Here's a few reasons why we should, and maybe this is not new to any of you. Metcalfe's Law. So I worked for 3Com. The founder of 3Com was Robert Metcalfe, and you've heard of Moore's Law. Well, Metcalfe's Law says that the value of a communications network is proportional to the square of the number of users. And really, that's the notion that when you go from 2 phones to 5 phones to exponential numbers of those, just as General Cartwright had mentioned, calling this crowdsourcing. This is a form of crowdsourcing. The information gets more numerous, but it also gets more valuable, provided you have a way of parsing through the wheat in the chaff. We've had a number of examples where Metcalfe's Law works well, particularly the Financial Services ISAC. I assume many of you are members of that organization, or recipients of their feeds and contributors to their feeds. I think that's a very powerful example. Here are a few other reasons, besides Metcalfe's law. I mean, I think the primary reason that I want to get across is, again, to echo General Cartwright, really none of us is as smart as all of us, right? The collective intelligence is always going to be more responsive and more effective than if we go it alone. But we see that cyber criminals have already figured this out. They figured out collaboration because they're in it for the money. And there's more money to be had if there is more sharing of capabilities and more sharing of opportunities, because they have exponential opportunities online. Collective intelligence, earlier warning. This is why we have early warning. This organization is an outstanding example of why we should be partnering. That collectively, you all are contributing information that is being used to develop new capabilities, new antidotes for fraud. And that's collective intelligence, and that gives you earlier warning and faster response to incidents to be able to anticipate where things are happening. Cost savings, risks averted, reputation maintained. At Bank of America, we had a fairly sophisticated network of partnerships where we could actually put numerical value. We could define metrics that say, if we had not done this level of information sharing, if we had not gotten this one piece of intelligence, X number of computers would have been infected, and what does it cost per computer to wipe it clean and re-image it? You multiply that figure, $200, $500 per computer, times 2, 3, 5, 10,000 computers that might be infected in one hit. You have real metrics there. So when you start thinking about, well, how do you justify more resources? How do you justify security operations to the C-suite executives who don't quite understand? You're asking me to spend $1 million on this, and you got to prove a negative. We spent $1 million and nothing happened. Well, that's great, but was it because of $1 million, or was it because we just got lucky? If you've got a way to really measure quantitatively in dollar value, then that cost savings is a very powerful reason why we should partner and avert risks and maintain reputation and ultimately maintain your customers. Keep your customers happy. Nobody wants to see your financial institution as untrustworthy and an unsafe place to do business online. All right. So I want to give you an example of a partnership that almost worked. And before we click on the link, sir, just to give you an idea of what this is, in 2007, when I was at Homeland Security, one of the things we were really concerned about was a cyber attack on physical infrastructure, control systems security. Some of you have heard about this in the latest news about Stuxnet and the Iranian nuclear facilities. What we wanted to do was to test the hypothesis that a remote cyber attack could infiltrate an electric substation, electric company's substation, get into the control systems and change the settings so that it would mess up the rotation of the generator. The notion being that as the sort of internet protocol becomes more ubiquitous in the corporate environment, where electric companies often would be firewalled, air-gapped from their substations with a technician on site 24/7, now they found cost savings, and they could actually connect and work that substation remotely from headquarters. Well, of course, the headquarters is connected to the internet in some way or another. So your way to the substation is through headquarters. And we postulated that there is an insider who is disgruntled. He knows just the right amount to understand the settings of this particular protective relay that regulates the amount of electricity going in and out. So we went and bought a generator. We partnered. with Idaho National Labs, with some experts in the electric sector, with the Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, a few others. We bought this generator used. We simulated it being online, but actually it was offline. And we perpetrated this attack on it with the intention of taking it quietly to the electric sector and say, look here, you've got a problem. So this is what we did. If you could click on the top link, cyber attack on electric generator, and this is just a less than a 60-second generator goes up in smoke from a piece of computer code. And this was the long view. So the generator is literally toast. We went up to Capitol Hill to brief. At the time it was top secret. Until somebody leaked it to CNN, it leaked our video to CNN. But you know, to see a member of Congress's eyes go bug-eye when you said, "Mr. Chairman, this is equivalent to driving down the highway at 80 miles an hour in a stick shift and throwing it in reverse." That's what we did to that generator. So we thought we've successfully partnered with the sector and with the Department of Energy to demonstrate the risks of the security of our nation's control systems, whether they are managing electric generation, water purification, chemical manufacturing, transportation systems. We, however, then took it to the electric sector, and I don't want to overstate this, but there was a collective shrug. Understandably, it's expensive to retrofit these kinds of machines, but this ultimately becomes a matter of life and death. Killing one generator does not create a blackout. The electric sector, electric infrastructure is more resilient. But that's a multi-million-dollar machine, and you can't buy one off the shelf. It takes 6 months to replace one of these. Now, if there were a coordinated attack across an entire geographic region of multiple substations, you've created hundreds of millions of dollars of damage, and you've created a blackout. Then people's lives are lost. So that's what we had to deal with. Why hasn't this been fixed? If you want to click on that link, that's just a little bit of a dark humor, but that's something went wrong in.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
Failure to communicate. Even with it being aired on CNN, almost a national embarrassment, we had a failure to communicate. So an effective partnership, effective collaboration requires communication, and it requires action. It requires actionable information sharing. Now I want to talk a little bit about a collaboration that worked very well. By way of background, very recently, toward the end of March, but leading up to March, Microsoft and the financial services sector, represented by the Financial Services ISAC, NACHA, American Bankers Association, pulled together, recognizing that the Zeus and SpyEye botnets were really causing extensive losses, extensive fraud across our infrastructure, against our customers, against our banks, and it needed to be stopped. They were the Zeus and SpyEye botnets were implemented, executed on Microsoft infrastructure. They're using Hotmail. They're using Outlook. They're using MSN, Live.com. That's Microsoft's infrastructure. They got fed up, and they're using that infrastructure to send our customers emails that look like they're from Citibank, look like they're from Bank of America or from Chase or JP Morgan, but they're not. And those phishing attacks result in links or attachments opened up that download a Trojan onto your computer, install a keylogger, take over your bank account online, steal your identity, steal your money, and shoot that botnet out across multiple other victims. 3.5 million computers were infected, almost $500 million in damage, something like 200,000 emails per minute in this wide-scale phishing expedition. So Microsoft, in the second or third of such operations, went to court to obtain a temporary restraining order on the John Does, and they are John Does because at this point they are only IP addresses and aliases without yet names of criminals attached to them. But to get a court order, temporary restraining order, to essentially divert, to take those botnets offline, and instead of my computer now beaconing off to the botnet herder, to the bot herder, it takes a U-turn and it goes back to Microsoft. And now what Microsoft is able to see is what the infected computers are beaconing, think they're beaconing to the bot herder. And now the Zeus cyber criminals, all of their signals go dark. And that was a major takedown, happened at the end of March, and it was a significant blow to the cyber criminals, and just a stellar example, I think, of how partnerships work, where two sides, and I was involved in some of the briefings, are giving information to one another that's very sensitive about our respective business models, and other issues. So, sir, let's run that link. This is about a 4-minute video that just gives you an overview of what it's about.
We're in Scranton, Pennsylvania, along with the United States Marshal Service. We're about to head to a hosting provider, which is hosting a command and control server for the Zeus family of botnets. We're going to go there unannounced, and the reason for this is that we have to do it by surprise. We're ready to go here. We don't want the individuals that are running the botnet to understand or have any type of information that we're coming, because that would guarantee that they would move. Hopefully this action will disrupt not only one, but multiple botnets, and more importantly, will allow us to get visibility into the criminal organization which really runs and develops the Zeus family of malware.
In the past, crime against banks and against people was with stick-ups. Now it's with mouse clicks.
With the advent of online banking, that huge convenience that almost everybody is enjoying at this point, the bad guys are really starting to exploit that.
The losses that we've seen going back to 2005 are estimated at $477 million. The cyber criminal uses often email as a way to deliver what we call malware onto your system to do this account hijacking. Well, what does the malware do? It's actually monitoring your keystrokes. You're sitting at your terminal, maybe accessing your bank account.
And it's waiting for you to put in your username and your password, and it steals it as you enter it into the browser.
They can then go access your account and steal the money out of it without you even knowing it.
This really is a global problem, and the amount of money that's available or that's been targeted by the bad guys really just underscores how bad the problem is.
We've sat back and we have taken it. I think we need to go on the offensive.
For Microsoft and the financial institutions to effectively combat
this type of cybercrime, they need to work together.
It's not as easy as finding an individual or even a group of individuals that are causing this problem. It's an intricate network, very sophisticated, very, very technical, and very hard to identify, and therefore very hard to prosecute criminally. Microsoft's experience in going after threats like this extend well beyond just the technology side. Also from a legal action perspective, they were experienced in understanding the best way to go after these type of cyber criminals.
There's two types of consumers: those who have been hacked and those who are about to be. The easiest way to protect yourself is to keep your computer patched with antivirus. Don't click on links that are unfamiliar to you.
It's way beyond just any one company or one individual can do to stop it. I think we as a society have to band together.
And that's not a technological solution. That is a community solution. That is a collaborative partnership solution.
We're not simply crying wolf anymore. This is our fourth operation. We're going to go out there and point out who you are, where you live, and we're going to hail you into court here in the United States or any other jurisdiction where we have the ability to do so.
The criminals will see that they have lost a lot of money, they've lost a lot of infrastructure, and now they're on the run.
We're done here in Scranton today. But the message is clear, that if you target our customers, if you target our platforms, we're going to target you.
All right. Thank you. Bruce Willis, got nothing on me, right? So I was proud to be a part of this. The whole Zeus spy thing was really quite insidious. Not just the sophistication of the tool sets, but the fact that they were for sale. Again, collaboration among the criminals. You know, let's call it business, but these are botnet tools that are available on the black market online at a cost of anywhere from $700 to $15,000, depending on the bells and whistles that you want to use to infect and defraud customers. We're tracking how effective this operation was. Preliminary results I just actually got from NACHA this morning, that what they've watched over the past several weeks, on a weekly basis, emails that are fraudulently claiming to come from NACHA domains are down 90% since the takedown. Spoofed emails that look like it's coming from NACHA, they're down 90%. Phone calls to the NACHA customer service about suspicious emails, those are down about 20% since the takedown. And email inquiries about suspicious emails, email inquiries to NACHA officials from customers, they're down 95%. And this pretty much tracks the results from previous efforts by Microsoft for the Wolodeck botnet and a few others that they've done, that they basically make the botnets go dark. And then next step is for us to work with, now we bring in law enforcement to do the forensics, to try to then identify, as best as possible, do the attribution, who's actually responsible for this. And then work with the ISPs and the hosting companies, the web hosting companies, to inform their customers, the users of those infected 3.5 million machines, that they have been infected and here's what they need to do to clean their machines. But they are now free from the bot herder. This is a great example. Let me give you another example. So we've got about 20 minutes left. So one of the things that we did at Department of Homeland Security, I had under me the U.S. CERT, the Computer Emergency Readiness Team, and the National Communications Coordination Center, which was to work with telecom companies and the various federal agencies to ensure the availability, survivability of our communications infrastructure. And these two groups had 24/7 watch and warning operations, but they never really talked to each other. Now, how can that be? You've got cyber and you've got communications. We're all operating on an internet protocol. The lines are blurring between IT and communications and cyber. Why don't we put those together? So this is one of the first things I worked to do when I got to DHS in 2006. And the vision was to develop a broader national joint operations capability. What I envisioned was a room about this big with computer monitors all around the perimeter, with stations all throughout the room. At this station is Department of Homeland Security. At that station is the Department of Defense. The next one is Treasury. Over there is the Financial Services Information Sharing Analysis Center. Over there is the IT ISAC. Over there is the state of California. And now what you've got is a large collaborative organization, a room with all of these people breathing the same air, in some cases looking at the same network activity, talking to one another as individuals, as human beings, on a trust relationship about what's going on their respective networks and what's going on collectively in real time, so that we're much better informed, and B, much more prepared to react quickly in real time if something is actually happening. So that was the vision. Time ran out with my tenure, as you know, and I was with President Bush, and President Obama comes in, and like all political appointees, thanks for your service, get out. And the next team comes in. Well, the next team thought very much like I did, and they picked up where I left off, to their great credit. And what came of it is now called the NCIC, the National Cyber and Communications Integration Center. And this is just a depiction of just some of the organizations that are either there now or are soon to be. And this came out of a comprehensive national cyber strategy that President Bush ordered, and that we developed in about 6 months' time. It really was quite record-breaking policy development. And one of the directives of that strategy was we need to connect the centers. We have within the government 6 or 7 cyber operation centers that are silos, not talking to one another. So we need to connect all of those. And then we need to connect all of those to those who own and operate 85% of the critical infrastructure, which is the private sector. We've got to connect those private sector people to state government people. And we've got to connect those to educational institutions. As you know, there's a lot of mischief that goes on in the educational community with some really smart graduate students. And then we've got to connect internationally. So this is the genesis behind the NCIC. This is an example of real collaboration. It's still maturing. It still has a lot of hiccups. Anything associated with DHS has a lot of hiccups right now. It still does. It's still a young organization, believe it or not, even almost 10 years old now. So I'm just going to run through a quick list here. I've just got a couple more minutes before we can open it up for any questions. Here's just an example of many partnerships that are maturing, that are doing well. Sector coordinating councils. Many of you might be involved in these. Way back 10 years ago, there was a presidential order that said, you know, we really have to get organized on critical infrastructure. And that organization means that all of the major private sector critical infrastructures need to self-organize. They need to self-organize into sector coordinating councils. So now we have 18 of them. We have the IT Sector Coordinating Council, the Financial Services Sector Coordinating Council. I chaired their cyber committee. There's transportation, there's water, on and on. All of those major infrastructures that are essential to the well-being of our economy and our homeland security. And that those organizations need to look across their infrastructure and say, what are our vulnerabilities? Where are the gaps that we need to fill? How do we do that collectively? How do we do it in partnership because we are all interconnected? How do we do it individually? So sector coordinating councils at varying degrees of sophistication and partnership are alive and well today. Many of them have some fairly sophisticated programs in partnership with Homeland Security, with their sector-specific agencies, those that regulate them or are at least responsible for them. The enduring security framework was, if General Cartwright is still here, was an understanding from the Defense Department side that they have thousands of major suppliers, hardware, software suppliers. What level of assurance does the Defense Department have that the products, the software, the hardware, the services that they are deploying inside DoD networks, what are the assurances that they are free from malware, they are free from corruption, they are free from something that's going to compromise the security, integrity, availability of DoD networks? So they pulled together something called the Enduring Security Framework at the CEO level and at the engineering level to say, let's look across, this relationship between companies and DoD and make sure we're not missing something that's going to put our young soldiers in harm's way because we've installed some system that actually belongs to somebody else overseas who has nefarious purposes. NSTAC, National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee, it's been around for about 30 years. It's an advisory committee between telecom, Defense Industrial Base, and the White House. Trade associations, of course, for all of you who are thinking about what are the venues that you can be engaging in if you're not doing enough of it, your trade associations, early warning, American Bankers Association, NACHA, et cetera. Those are very important venues for sharing information, discovering best practices for how to do your job better. There are more. I've talked about early warning, about FSISAC. I've talked about NKIC, National Security Information Exchange, very interesting. That belonged to the National Communications System. The telecom people would get together in a room, and there were just a couple of rules. If you become a member of the NSIE, it is you, by name. It's Paul Finch. He comes to the meeting, no designees. He has to bring something to the table. Can't just come take notes. You actually have to come and bring something real, something that's going to be used by the others. And the third rule is, don't take any information from those meetings and use them for competitive advantage, because we're all in this together. So some very simple rules that can engender trust. And again, trust is a key ingredient in any collaborative environment. More. InfraGard, some of you might be involved in that FBI group, Electronic Crimes Task Force. They all have the same model, bringing together industry, government, law enforcement people, figure out what's going on out there, how do we stop it, how do we improve. Let's open up our kimonos a little bit. I'll open mine if you open yours. We have to give some kind of sensitive information, because if it isn't sensitive, it probably isn't useful. Got to show trust. Partnership for Critical Infrastructure Security is sort of the overarching organizational structure for the sector coordinating councils that I mentioned. There are standards organizations that deal with building better software code. Again, software competitors all together, revealing some of their secrets about how they do things to try to develop a standardized way of doing it better. The ICASI group is about finding flaws in software and hardware that could affect the functioning of the internet. Information Security Forum, global organization based in the UK, bringing together practitioners across the spectrum, cross-sectoral, to think about best practices, different tools and products that they can create, member-created tools. Wouldn't it be great if I had something like this? Great, well, let's all pull together and make it happen. Sometimes it's actually software. Open Group Trusted Technology Forum, sort of the same thing as the Enduring Security Framework. Customer-focused. How do we provide our customers a higher level of assurance? This is something I was driving heavily at Bank of America, which is to get this large group of companies like Oracle and HP and Juniper, Microsoft and others to say, Give me some level of assurance that the products that I'm putting into my infrastructure is clean. It's never going to be 100% clean, but at least show me that you've taken certain steps all along the supply chain, the global supply chain, from design to development to manufacture to coding to quality assurance to distribution, packaging, all of that. Show me what steps you've taken. It's a collaborative partnership. It's a customer-supplier relationship that has to take place. Customers really cannot dictate. If you imagine, if Oracle had 50 different customers telling it 50 different ways to manage its supply chain, it's not going to happen. All right. So, I think I've said some of these lines throughout my talk. Do well by doing good. We're here for a greater purpose. We're here for your customers. We're here for your banks. Or we're here for the trustworthiness of the financial system that we all depend upon. Those who collaborate prevail. That's very Darwinistic. None of us is as smart as all of us. I mean, pick yours. I didn't mention this one. That was too many words for me. Reciprocal altruism is an evolutionary biology concept applied to economic decision making. I don't know why I put that in there, but it's an interesting idea. Bees and ants do it. Why can't we? I was going to put up a YouTube video of ants and bees collaborating. They are phenomenal. They communicate in ways, and they interact and operate in unison in a coordinated, synchronized fashion instantaneously, based on the swarm. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could do that? Then we'd really be better and faster than the adversaries. So I'm going to close out here. Natural selection. Do we cede it to anonymous or do we keep a head? The guy over there doesn't have a head. And so the point here is that partnering like a neighborhood watch, it is an evolution. It takes time to build the trust. And if our trust in each other as victims, as collective victims of fraud and cyber attacks, if the trust doesn't evolve along with all of the threats and all of those other collaborative criminal partnerships that are arrayed against us, we might just become, victims of natural selection. I mean, that's perhaps an overstatement, but I think we have to think about it in terms of a neighborhood watch. And together, I think we've got to start planting those trees. So I will end it there. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been great talking with you. We have about 10 minutes if there are any questions from anybody. Yes, sir.
Great talk, by the way. So what challenges have you faced raising the awareness of decision makers who can help make things happen? And what successes can you share with us to aid us in doing the same?
The challenges are always, as I mentioned earlier, it's always about budget, isn't it? It's always about money. To have a good defense, you have to invest in the latest technology. You have to invest in the latest products. And the way to justify that expenditure is to postulate to your CEO, to your CFO, what would happen if X happened. And I would hearken back to a 2007 report by the Business Roundtable. Very well done. And it said, if a major cyber attack happened, or series of cyber attacks that degraded the dependability and availability and the trustworthiness of the internet as a place to do business and to shop and whatever else, who would be responsible for that? Who in the company that depends upon that internet? Well, a major attack happens. What's going to happen? First, you got to get PR involved. Okay, so the chief communications officer, chief marketing officer is going to have to worry about the brand and the reputation. Chief financial officer is going to be looking at loss of shareholder value because investors are pulling out. Chief technology officer is going to be blamed. And the CEO is the one who's going to have to go in front of the public and say what happened. So then it becomes very personal. Because, the conventional wisdom is cybersecurity. It's not my business. That's the IT guy. Just take care of it and don't bother me. Just make sure everything's up and running. So when you put it in those terms, and then you can start, as we did at Bank of America, really be able to put real numbers on costs averted from loss of infrastructure, from downtime, and you can quantify that. It's not always easy. Some assumptions have to be made. But the challenge always is just that, is how do you make the business case, and how do you get the attention of the C-suite to actually put the resources where you need it. Successes are many, and one example was most recently with Bank of America. The chief technology officer felt very strongly about this. Of course, a very senior person in the organization. Some of you know him. And it was his philosophy that he needs to get in touch with all of his counterparts across the banking community and say, look, we all have a collective problem. We know what it is. Let's pull together now. And let's start talking about this in ways that might make us feel a little uncomfortable. But that's the only way we're actually going to learn from each other and actually figure out ways. So we did a series of these. We called them just our summits. We hosted them, day and a half of meetings, bring in some guest speakers, some very smart people outside of our sector, either vendors or others who had a specific contribution to make, whether we were talking about advanced persistent threats or the latest fraud techniques, or about supply chain security. And we closed ourselves off in a room and built those trust relationships. And why? Why? Because it happened from a believer at a very senior level. Because then all of his counterparts from the other banks said, okay, well, if he's interested, maybe I suppose I shouldn't miss out on this. So that's really where it starts. It starts at the top. And I spent a lot of time traveling the country at DHS trying to talk to CEOs. And I did talk to some CEOs who literally said, no, it's just the cost of doing business. And you're not going to change those minds. They're making a calculation. They're making a risk calculation. Yeah, we could lose $5 million. But I'm not willing to invest the $6 million to make sure it doesn't happen. We'll take the hit if it happens. Who else? All right, 3 minutes to spare. Thank you all very much.
This concludes the first portion of our summit. Please take a few moments to enjoy a break. We will regroup promptly in 15 minutes.